Today, we are talking to Nicole Gampp, and she is the Senior Alliance Manager at Compass Therapeutics. And she has a really interesting career path. It's not linear. I think that that's really something to emphasize is that we sort of sometimes aspire to a certain career and think there's one way to get there. And that's definitely not the case. And so I just want to make it really clear that everybody's career paths are winding, and we'll hear about Nicole's. And then we're also going to talk about what an alliance manager does and what's next in her career. So with that, I'm going to invite Nicole up onto the stage. Hey, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Corinne and everyone online. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite.
I would love you to walk us through your career path to start out. How did you end up where you are, and kind of what were some of those twists and turns along the way?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Definitely didn't think I'd be here when I graduated from college. So maybe backing up even a little further, because I think that gives some context. I grew up 50-50 in Switzerland and in the US. So I did my elementary school and middle school education in the US and then transitioned over to Switzerland for high school and university. So lots of kind of different perspectives that I grew up, very culturally diverse as well, which was great and kind of also led me to different opportunities that I've been able to partake in my actual career. So I did my bachelor's and master's in Switzerland in biology, had the opportunity to then do my master thesis, so a 8-month research opportunity here in Boston at Harvard University. And then following that, I didn't really know what to do. It was I'd been prepping so much for my, final exam, final presentation. I remember I woke up the following morning and I was just like, oh my gosh, nothing's given to me anymore. There's like no direction. You have your courses given to you, when exams are going to be, but now you really kind of have the whole world you can dip into. So I had to kind of reflect on what did I want to do. I knew I didn't want to do a PhD at the time, which I think was a large question for me. I think also coming, from a master's in a science field, the route typically was to do a PhD, at least the university I went to. So I needed to reflect, and I was like, oh, I can't do research at the moment, but I still want to be somehow related to the science. So thinking kind of, what do I want to do? What do I still want to learn? Really helped me decide what to apply to. It wasn't just kind of a free for all. And for me, it was really always being able to learn. I'd grown a lot of technical skills during my university time, but the soft skills were lacking just a little. And, you can always improve upon them. So I wanted something that would, give me more of that, as well as, of course, work for a company that really stood behind their mission of helping people. That's always been kind of one of my big factors when choosing anything, what to do. And of course, being in Switzerland, you have two of the largest pharma companies there. So I was obviously drawn automatically to Novartis and Roche. So I applied for a few different positions there, mainly in HR and communications, because they were still connected to the science, but very much, again, focused on those soft skills that I really wanted to pick up on. So luckily, I did an internship there, was at Roche for 2 years in their talent acquisition department, and then realized as I was recruiting for various managers in various departments, I was like, oh, I actually do want to be maybe on a different team, a different side of the business. And so I had fortunately seen an online ad for a company that Roche had acquired a couple years prior in medical affairs. It was their operations team. They were doing molecular tumor boards, so very much involved with the science, but again, from a different perspective. And I remember one of my colleagues actually kind of made me apply for it. He was the one who kind of pushed the apply button for me because I was too scared to make the jump. One, it was a position in the US. I was based in Europe, so I thought I didn't have a chance anyway. Again, another completely different field. So really thankful to him that he made me kind of go and take that leap of faith. And I was there the company was Foundation Medicine, there for roughly 2.5, 3 years, where I again found out, I might actually like a different department, which was then alliance management and business development, and was able to do a rotation within that team for roughly a year, where I figured, actually, I think this is where my strengths might lie and what I want to pursue moving forward. And then ultimately landed here at Compass Therapeutics in my current role.
That's such a cool career path. How did you enjoy working in Switzerland as opposed to the US? What was different?
Very different lifestyle, I would say. I remember the first day on the job, it was like 5:05 and everyone was standing up and leaving. And I had just finished my research thesis and, there I was working 22-hour days in the lab or what have you. So I was like, where's everyone going? They're like, oh, it's 5:00. We have to go home and spend time with family and friends. So I think mindset's very different there in terms of really prioritizing work-life balance, but still very much driven and very mission focused for the patient.
That's really interesting. I've heard that before as well. And yeah, Novartis and Roche are huge. And so we see people who do even secondments, they work in the US for a little while into Switzerland. So it's interesting to see the differences. What advice would you give to someone who's really early career and thinking maybe they like alliance management, or maybe that's something that they would like to pursue? Because you sort of came to it from a bit of a roundabout way. But if you're graduating now and you know you want to do that, how could somebody get into that?
For me, it's always been use your network. It's sometimes hard to get in or like understand what alliance management also is. I know when I tell my friends and family, like, what they're like, what do you do? What is an alliance manager? So I think one, like understanding really what the role is. I like to say it's kind of an ambassador for the company externally facing. And that could either be to corporate, other corporate partners, even patient advocacy groups, or as well other research collaborations, right? So kind of understanding even within alliance management, there's a big various focuses within it. And then really just network, ask people, what they think. There's also groups you can go attend. They have like free webinars, free courses as well. One's the ASAP group, the Association of Strategic Alliance Professionals. They're a huge help. They kind of give the framework of what an alliance manager is and also kind of the career path you can envision with that.
That's interesting. I'll make sure that I'm going to take a note of that. We'll link that in the notes after this. ASAP. I love the acronym.
Yes. Awesome. We actually have a conference coming up in November. Just a shout out for that too, in case anyone's interested. Yeah.
Where is that? Is that a virtual conference or is it in person?
That will be in Boston.
Oh, great.
Yes.
I'm sure it's not a free event, but for somebody who's interested in getting in there, that's probably a great place to invest in your network.
Yes, definitely. That or even just seeing who's on the panel, giving the talks, and then cold emailing them or reach out on LinkedIn, really.
Yeah.
Definitely recommend that.
So let's double click a little bit on what you do day to day. So I know that there are different flavors of alliance management, but what do you do? What's a typical day in your life?
Very diverse. We are a small company, so we're roughly 35 people now, I think. So alliance management isn't the only role I have, but if we just focus on that for a second, it's really ensuring everything that we do with our external industry partners, everything there is going smoothly. So whether that be, standard or weekly calls or, whatever the cadence is, ensuring things on our clinical side are running smoothly. They have all the information they're requesting, information we're requesting. We also have kind of the bigger joint steering committee meetings that happen once every 6 months or once every year, depending on how that partnership is set up. So really just making sure everything that was initially contractualized is also being delivered upon from our end, as well as we're receiving everything that we need as well from our partners.
And what's the difference between like program management and alliance management? Because we sometimes hear those two things kind of said in the same breath.
True. And there's a lot of overlap. That's true. I think program management is very much internally facing. So you are, you're responsible for one or however many programs. Whereas the alliance manager, you do obviously need to understand what those programs entail and where you are on deliverables and timelines, but you're also needing to communicate that externally and making sure everyone is aligned on the same page. So not just an internal perspective, but the external perspective as well.
That makes sense. And I hear you say the word communicate a lot. Other than that, what are some of the really key skills that you have either picked up in the job or that were transferable from some of your other jobs that you use every day?
Definitely. Organizational focus is key. You're kind of, you're liaising with a bunch of different departments, internally, externally, sometimes as well. You obviously need to stay on top of deliverables. So definitely the organizational skills. What else? I think the cultural aspect too. So again, it depends who your partners are, but we have international partners. And so understanding their culture, the way their company is set up, if they're more hierarchical than the one you're at, kind of diplomacy as well. That's sometimes a big key thing. Yeah. And empathy. I think, you're trying to find a solution that impacts and is best for both parties, as well as hopefully then whoever you are trying to support and help, right? Whether in our case, those are patients. So you really kind of need to gain understanding of all the various perspectives, but still keep everyone on the same kind of, mission and end result.
When you switched into alliance management, I imagine that was a pretty big shift because you were doing a completely different function. How did you create that possibility?
Yes. Thank you for the question. I think you really need to advocate for yourself. And I know I used to feel very uncertain about doing that. Just, in terms of seniority or internal politics, even sometimes. But I advocated, and I also had a manager who supported me, which is, you can't always take that for granted. Supported a rotation that I set up within the same company, but it was a rotation within the biopharma team where they did alliance management and business development. So I reached out to a few different managers. One manager was like, "Oh yeah, we would love to have you kind of shadow and start something here." So I did that, I think 20, 30% initially, and then it ramped up to 80%, 100% at the end, and really was lucky to have that opportunity to kind of see if I even liked that field. And that's kind of what got me rolling in the alliance management department. Yeah.
That's amazing. And remind me, how many people were at the company at that point?
This was my previous company. So we were, I think, 1,500 across various positions. Yeah.
Yeah. So that I want to underscore that because we've spoken with a few people who have forced a change in a smaller organization where they don't have the systems in place. So if you were at an organization like Foundation, which that was Foundation, am I correct in saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, luckily there was a sort of mechanism in place to be able to go shadow and do a rotation in other departments. And if that is available to you, that's amazing. But how do you initiate that conversation with your manager? Because it's maybe a little uncomfortable to say, "Hey, I really want to go try something new."
Yes. So it was definitely an option that we had at Foundation. I think in the way I did it, it was a little new and different from maybe how the standard process was. So I definitely forced something there at times as well. But I think, hopefully you have a healthy relationship with your manager where they can see as well that you're trying to grow. Hope you have those constant feedback sessions with them as well. And so hopefully you're already having those discussions as, hey, this might not be exactly what I'm looking for, but this other department might fulfill some of that yearning you are in terms of what you want to learn. So luckily, my manager was super supportive. I think I broached it in a way of, it was at our mid-year or something like that, kind of more standard process. But I think we both came to the conclusion I could take on more and I wanted to see more. So she was thinking of ideas that I could do. She advocated for various projects for me within the organization, but then was also open to me doing a rotation. Of course, you have to align, your current workload cannot, reduce and be sacrificed for your rotation as well. But if everything's in place, definitely, have that conversation with your manager.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So other folks that I've spoken with that have forced a transition of some type, often there's that little bit of a hustle time where you're like, okay, I'm going to do my job and I'm going to do at least part of another job because I need to, right? And so you're still sort of full time in your role and you're trying out something else. So that's maybe one of the seasons that work-life balance kind of goes out the window if you're really trying to force a change before it kind of comes back into balance. Is that accurate?
Definitely. You obviously want to impress the new people, right? In whatever department you're shadowing or rotating in. They have all their obligations, their meetings. So you need to definitely be mindful of not exerting yourself too much. You're obviously going to be working more than 100%, but you don't want it to affect the quality of your work on either end.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important discussion point. Okay. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the transferable skills from your other role, besides just the soft skills. Like, were there any specific hard skills that you learned that you find yourself glad that you know or are able to reference in this job?
Yeah. So from my time in HR talent acquisition, definitely dealing with all seasoned people. So I, had managers who had been at the company for 50 years. They definitely knew what they were talking about, and trying to, come up to their level in terms of being able to recruit for them. So I think I learned a lot of valuable kind of people skills there. And then from my time being in medical affairs, really obviously operationally focused. That was our kind of main task, coordinating different meetings across various time zones, dealing also with, physicians who had a very busy schedule. And in that role as well, we did a lot of program management. We were managing, various kind of country programs for the molecular tumor board. So a lot of project management skills there as well, even though it was never very formal, as well as seeing things from a more strategic perspective and understanding kind of how communication from the science world really then influences and impacts kind of perception of the science, right, to the physicians or to patients.
Yeah, I really like that. So let's chat about that just a little bit, because one common theme here in this community is making a career transition. And I have people who come and they say, I have not done XYZ. And in reality, when you really think about it, often you have done that. It's just not been called that. So I like your example of the project management skills. Yeah, you weren't calling it project management, but you were managing projects. Therefore, if you were to interview for this, that's something you could talk about.
Definitely. I think I had a lot of conversations when I was looking at what would I like to transition to next, or what am I interested in just the job title, right? Sometimes job titles are super catchy and you're like, I have no idea what this person actually does or what this role is. So you go and have a conversation with the hiring manager and they kind of say, oh, you seem great, but your background really isn't kind of the typical person we'd look for. So you really have to come or understand that it's not always going to be a yes. It's not always going to be easy, but you need to take those kind of rejections, so to speak, and kind of just redirect. And if you know that's what you want, there are definitely ways to get there. You just sometimes need to be a bit more creative or maybe a bit more patient to get there in the end.
Yeah, I love that. I think sometimes a rejection is seen as a negative thing, but if you are an eternal optimist, like I tend to be, it's actually a learning opportunity, right? You learn how you need to communicate that better in the future. So
Yes.
that's how I always, when people talk about getting, oh, I was rejected because I didn't have XYZ. Well, now you've learned that that's something that they're going to be looking for. And you're going to be armed with, actually, I do have these transferable skills next time.
Definitely. I think so. When I was I was in Switzerland working at Roche, right? And I'd seen this job. It was in the US in Boston for foundation. And I was like, no way are they going to ever even look at my application, right? It wasn't a role or at a level where, my expertise would be really required. It was more of an entry level position. So why would they choose somebody from Europe, have the hassle of bringing me over, one, cultural shock, logistics. At the time too, COVID had just started. So, my start date kept getting pushed back as well. So I was always afraid, it would ultimately result in a no, we're not going to hire you. But I think looking at also the job that I applied for, it was in the US, but it had an international focus. So if you can find somehow the skills or the experiences you've been through and translate that into the new role, even if it's, a minimal portion of it, I think that already helps the hiring manager see, you've given it a lot of thought and how you can grow and how they can also grow and benefit from your skills that you have.
Yeah, that's really good insight. All right, let's talk a little bit about your degree. So you have an MBA. Is that correct?
I'm thinking of doing one.
That's right. Okay. So we are curious how that may or may not impact this career path, because that's often seen when I see where project managers have a PMP, right? Or business development folks have an MBA.
Yeah.
How important have you seen that with the folks that you've worked with in the past? And how are you weighing that as you decide?
Yeah, really good questions. Ones that I'm going through myself too. I don't think it's necessary, to be fully honest. I think, experience also speaks for itself. The amount of projects you've already taken on. It's obviously nice to kind of have those initials after your name to kind of justify, I can do this job. But I think if you've shown you can do a skill in a job you already have, or those skills that you have can be transferable, really just networking a lot too. I think an MBA is definitely nice to have, but most of the people in alliance management who I know do not have an MBA. They might have a PhD, for example, especially if they're the ones doing the research partnerships. That's definitely very helpful.
Yeah. And we're going to be speaking, I don't know if it's later this month or early next month, with somebody who is a research focused PhD alliance manager, because it's so interesting to compare and contrast that, as well as people are thinking about career paths and what can I do. And I think in your, with your business development and your talent acquisition background, which I can tell you, there's a lot of sales in that. I can tell you firsthand.
Yes.
So are there any other things that you would pursue to make yourself more marketable in the future or to advance your learning?
Yes, again, I'm going to reference the ASAP community. This is again specifically for alliance management. So they have 2 different certificates you can get. So I'm actually studying for the first certificate. And then there's another one I can take in a couple of years after you have, some more experience. but definitely looking at that. And then of course, just online Coursera or, things, not even that I need a certificate per se, but more just to open my mindset and self-growth.
Yeah, never stop learning. For those certifications, what are the differences there and why do you need to wait a couple of years for the second one?
They want you just to, I think, have kind of implemented the learnings that you have in your first couple of years and what you also then show in your exam, the first exam. They really kind of want you to take that to the next level before you then take the second part. So I think they're just looking for years of experience and kind of how many different partnerships you've had and the kind of different variety of partnerships as well.
What's the next step in your career? How does this career ladder work for you?
Alliance management isn't my only role per se here. I also do patient advocacy. I've taken on more of like competitive intelligence, business development. So I have like a slew of things that I get to work on, which is great and keeps things interesting. So I'm still trying to figure out kind of which path I want to move forward, which is also why I'm thinking of doing the MBA. But, in terms of really just the alliance management, it's working maybe with more partners, with larger corporate partners, since that's kind of what I'm focused on here in terms of alliance management. And then really kind of being able to single-handedly lead a partnership, maybe from A to Z through that whole life cycle.
That's neat. What does the titling look like there if you were to stay in the alliance management lane? Is there at your company or other companies, does it go to head of alliance management? Like, what's the ladder look like? And if you wanted to go to C-suite, what would that look like?
Yes, that does vary within each company. So I think for me, the next step would be, associate director, director, and then some people end up going within operations. Sometimes there's like a pure strategy team where people fall under there. I've even seen sometimes within like the clinical or research department, sometimes they also have their own alliance managers. So it really varies within company to company, but you can definitely make your way up as a pure alliance manager for sure.
Excellent. And if you went the more business route, let's say you wanted to go into business development, what does that look like? Obviously the chief business officer is kind of your your aspiration there, but what in between there and what flavor does that take on?
That would, I think, depend on kind of, again, what flavor of business development I'd want to go into. Right now, I'm doing a lot of competitive intelligence. So that's going to a variety of different conferences, which has been really cool and kind of scouring the landscape and, how obviously our company and our molecules place within the larger context. And I think if you continue that, you can definitely go that route. There's also the business development of more of, contracting and kind of that would almost be like the step prior to alliance management, right? You have a business development person who makes sure everything, they find the partnership, they set up everything contractually, and then they hand it over to the alliance manager to really ensure that everything in the contract also is executed.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about competitive intelligence? Because we haven't talked to anybody who's done that. What is cool about that? And I think for a scientist, that's probably pretty particularly interesting.
I've learned it within the last year, and by learning, I'm definitely very new to it. But it's been great. You really get to, you have access to a variety of different resources. Like Bloomberg, for example, is one. You get to read a lot of analyst reports, again, attend conferences, see what other companies are doing, what their pipeline looks like. It is a lot of reading. And I would also say here a PhD is definitely helpful to kind of understand and be able to digest some of the science behind the various clinical pipelines. But it's very interesting if you love to read, if you love kind of the analytical mindset. Definitely something you could look into and pursue.
Yeah, it sounds like a really fun career. In another life, I could see myself doing that. If
So
only
much
we
to
had
do, so little time.
I think about all the 100 careers I actually want to do. So, Compass, how is the culture there compared to Foundation and then compared to like a really big company?
Yeah, I went from over 100,000 employees to over 1,000, and now and when I joined, it was like roughly 30, or we just reached 30. So very different. I would say the culture here is very open, very helpful. We all come into the office. So if you have a question, you can just walk right over, ask. We do a lot of like team building events as well. So I know my work colleagues on a much more personal level on the whole than compared to my previous other companies where there's so many of you, and so you tend to have kind of maybe your own little group and those people very well, but you kind of don't know the rest of the organization.
Which do you prefer? Have you enjoyed the smaller group?
I definitely have liked that you get to know everyone better. You really also build and strengthen your team making skills or bonding skills just because, you only have one person sometimes in each department. So you kind of have to get along. Um, so it's really been fun. And we all, we're all super open. And I think when we interview here too, kind of, they do a good job at also making sure the person would fit into the culture here. So no, it's been a great experience. Definitely a learning though, coming from a large corporation, a large also European corporation at the beginning, and now to a smaller team.
Yeah, definitely. Have you found that you touch more things in a smaller company, or do you feel like you still have the same reach that you did at other companies?
Oh, definitely. You never know what you're going to do that day. Sometimes, again, it's more of a patient advocacy focus, or, a day we have a big meeting with one of our partners. So you really do get to put on multiple hats, as you said. And also, I think if you're in a smaller company, you really do have the opportunity to kind of ask, oh, hey, I want to do this project. Is there some way we can make it happen? Whereas I feel like in the larger companies, obviously there's a lot more bureaucracy you need to go through. And that opportunity might not present itself as easily as in a smaller company.
What is some advice that you would give yourself, particularly if you had it all to do over again?
I would maybe probably be a little more mindful of planning my career. And I know, again, it's very nonlinear, and I'm super thankful that that was the case. But I think sometimes in moments you just doubt yourself. So maybe just always making sure like you do have an end goal in mind or an end skill you do want to learn.
Is there somebody in your life and your career who you found to be a really good mentor or someone you bounce things off of now?
Yes, luckily I have a few of those. Some are back in Europe, so we'll tend to send voice messages to each other on WhatsApp, which has been great. But no, I have a lot of mentors, people also who aren't officially mentors, but I think you need that network and support, especially also, people who are in your kind of field as well as people who aren't. I think you need a good balance of both.
That's a really good point. So, people who aren't in your field, give me an example of somebody like that for you who has been an outside perspective.
Yeah, still people within the research realm. I think, that was once a part of my life, but they're able to kind of see how I progress in more of a corporate setting instead of kind of following the traditional academic route, as well as in people in other departments. So, for example, commercial or finance or legal. Again, they have each such unique perspectives that sometimes after talking to them, you're like, oh, how come I didn't see this? Or this is actually, yes, what I'm good at. So
Oh, that's a
they
really
give
good
me
answer. Yeah, I think that perspective, it's hard to step back and to understand. In the moment, we're too close to some of these things, but people who are not us and then also in a slightly different career, I think they offer so much wisdom. So that's a great networking tip. Anything else that you want to tell us about your career or anything that you can impart to our little community here?
Yeah, I would say don't limit yourself. Have big dreams and then just see how you can act on it. And I would really encourage networking and just reaching out to people on LinkedIn. I've done that a bunch of times. And also what I've found out is, make sure the work that you do it wholeheartedly and really, put your 100% in, because there have been people that I find out months after I've started something, they're like, oh yeah, this person thought you'd be really good for this and they advocated for you. And I had no idea, that they'd done that. So I think really, giving your heart into what you do reflects and people will pick up on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's really good advice. Thank you so much for being here today. This was great.
Thanks for having me.